talking with Dr. Michael Salla about a lot of very interesting things. We're sort of stuck in a coasting phase here now. The government is probably trying to decide when it's time to give up this ludicrous cover-up that they've been maintaining for 65 years plus. And I don't know who's going to win. I, again, don't really care because I think people like Bill Tompkins and others, Dr. Bob Wood, and so many others over the years who've been on this program who have come forward telling their stories, telling what they've seen, leads us to the point now where we know there are things flying around above us, machines that land, that leave Earth, that can do incredible things that shouldn't be able to be done in terms of physics, but do, that are, in all probability, in many cases, ours, because of the advanced technology that Bill Tompkins learned about in the early 1940s from the German spies, or spies on Germany who were brought back. They're Americans who came back here to report and were debriefed, and he was able to watch these and interact with these people. So he learned early on, during the war years, that the technology was already there to take us off planet. There was a fellow in England, John, what's his name, Walston, I think I want to say. He had a telescope and was able to capture items that were in orbit, rather deep orbit, around Earth, that were parked there. And these look like enormous spaceships. Not Buck Rogers kinds of things, but just more like you'd see in 2001, A Space Odyssey. Do you remember seeing any of these pictures, Michael, when they came out? I had many of them on the site. John Walson, I think was his name. He went by that name right. Anyway.
Yes, I remember seeing some of those pictures, and they kind of substantiate that there was a secret set of space stations in orbit around the Earth. And I think that this is one of the aspects of the secret space programs as they've developed, that there are several of them that we need to kind of like look at in terms of having developed concurrently, which is something that's very important. You know, we've talked about, you know, what the Nazis did in South America and Antarctica. Bill Tompkins talked about what the Navy was doing in terms of developing these battle groups, these kilometre-long space cruisers and carriers that were basically going to be deployed in deep space. But I think, especially in the United States, as you know, all the different military services, they tend to kind of develop particular areas of expertise. Yeah. And I think the Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office, they were tapped to look after near-Earth orbits, basically make sure that any traffic to the Earth was under surveillance, and to kind of like form a last line of defense, if you like, against any kind of attack against the Earth. That I think that in terms of the military thinking, that would make sense. So you have the Navy out there with their forward deployed space battle groups, and if anything got through the Navy battle groups, then you would have the NRO, Air Force, space platforms with all of these advanced weapons, directed energy weapons technologies up there that fulfilled a number of functions, partly surveillance, then also defense, and then also kind of attack against any satellites that were deployed by nations who might have in any way interfered with the plans. And I found it very interesting, and I'm sure you probably covered this material at some point, the information from Peter Beta from the late 70s to I think it was 82, where there were these wars or these battles between the Air Force and the Russians up there. And I think that kind of makes a lot of sense, that there was this kind of effort to find out who would basically be in control of near-Earth orbit operations, and that the Russians developed these cosmospheres, and they basically competed against the NRO and the Air Force for dominance, and then eventually they reached some accommodation.
Yeah, that would have been the Soviets, of course. This Peter Beater is a very interesting figure who has all but vanished from history. He's just not talked about anymore. And he's well worth taking a look at, folks, if you're interested in doing some research. Beter, Peter Beater. Those pictures that I alluded to earlier, that John was able to image with his telescope and recorded on his video recorder. And he used to send them to me all the time. He's pulled a lot of them down, but they obviously, clearly, with no ambiguity, were enormous machines up there. And they looked rather like that we would be building things like that. They were square, they were long, they were this, they were that. They weren't very strange sci-fi looking curvy smooth craft. They were just enormous constructs, and it all fits. And then I found out, as you did, that we have at least two, and this is going back 15, 20 years, two satellites at stable geosync orbits 18,000 miles out, whose job it is to watch the planet and log all traffic coming and going to it. This told me a lot, too, back then, that there's a whole different thing going on. The NASA space program, and this doesn't demean the participation or the bravery of the astronauts involved, some gave their lives, was basically a misdirection, a canard. We were so far ahead of that and are. It's not funny. But when you have a program like the Apollo program with an enormous rocket, the Saturn V, and all of a sudden the plug is pulled on the program to the extent that the Saturn V booster is destroyed, the equipment that made it is destroyed, the blueprints that design and engineers used to construct them were allegedly destroyed as well. You say, what the hell is going on here? So, yeah, I agree. It's too obvious that there are things far in excess of what the mainstream media tells Mr. and Mrs. America are going on out there. Now, I got an email here. Can you please ask Dr. Sala, did the university tell him that UFOs are not real, and that's the reason you're not to teach about them? Did they tell you that they weren't real, or the truth that UFOs exist was too shocking to teach about? Did you ever get any ambiguous messages from them about their position on this thing? Did anyone admit to you that, yeah, they're there, but we just don't talk about that?
What I was told was basically that this area of research that I was doing was not appropriate for the university, and I actually got it in writing. So they sent me a letter of dismissal, and they just said exactly that my new area of research was not appropriate for the university, and this was a time to kind of like separate. So yeah, definitely just a topic that they felt was just not something.
Sounds like they stepped around it rather gently, in a way. Although being fired is never gentle. I think that given the grant money that keeps the universities functioning, people were well aware of what's at some level going on here. They almost have to be.
I remember talking to the dean of the school and talking all about the disclosure project and the evidence of the cover-up and all of these witnesses out there, and basically saying, well, this is an area that really is very important, and it's going to change how international studies is understood in the future. And the dean completely agreed with me, but he just said, well, when official disclosure happens, then we'll just get a couple of our professors to kind of like read up on the literature and start teaching courses. But they didn't want to have anything to do with it.
That's funny. Yeah. We've talked about the atomic explosions in the Antarctic in 1958, 3 of them, supposedly high altitude. I've got that from 2 different sources I was able to track down. So they weren't ground bursts. They were more EMF kind of thing. Maybe they were warnings, threatening to the Soviets to let them know that, hey, there's nowhere you can hide. I don't know. It was Cold War time. 1958. Things were just getting hotter and hotter all the time. And we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962.
I was just going to just quickly add there. I think that one of the things, if it's true that the U.S. military-industrial complex began cooperating with the Nazis in Antarctica, then I think it would have been in the interest of the U.S. To make the Soviets believe that nothing was happening, and so detonating atomic weapons down there might be one of the ways to do that, to kind of like fool them into thinking that, well, no, if there were joint bases, then they've been destroyed or they wouldn't be functioning any longer. But I think the U.S. definitely has been involved in operations down there for a long time.
Oh, yes, and I think that we have our underground boring and tunneling machines that are capable of extraordinary feats underground at a very rapid rate, and may well have honeycombed much of the Antarctic. Remember, it's not all ice like the Arctic is, folks. It's a landmass. It's a continent. And so you've got all the features there that we have here. Mountains, lakes, underground rivers, all kinds of things. Corey Goode and Tompkins, secret think tanks. Tell us your overview on that. So a lot of people don't know who Corey Goode is, so let's do a little background on Corey.
Sure. Well, he is someone that says that he served in the secret space programs from 1987 to 2007, that he worked on a number of programs, beginning with the Solar Warden program that was run by the Navy, that he served on a research vessel for about 6 years, and then he was reassigned to another branch of the secret space programs, doing other work related to interrogation of extraterrestrial visitors, trying to extract information. And so he, after a 20-year tour of duty, where during that time, as part of his duties, he says that to properly conduct these duties as an intuitive empath, because his job was to kind of like determine whether people were telling the truth or not. And so a decision was made by someone that in order for him to better be able to do that job, that was good for him to be able to brief himself or have access to briefing documents describing all aspects of the secret space programs in terms of how many there are, what the history of it.
Right.
That's
the big secret. Boy, that's the big secret. Yeah.
So he says he had access to these smart glass pads, similar to an iPad, but just fully transparent glass, and that during his service, during his downtime, and even sometimes when he was on official duty, that he would just be reading through this thing, reading all about the history of the programs, the different missions, the different colonies on the moon, colonies on Mars, bases on some of the moons of the outer planets, and reading about the history of the Germans and how the Germans developed their space programs, that this was everything that he was reading on these smart glass pads.
And this occurred while he was off planet.
Exactly. So from 1987 to 2007, he served for 20 years, and at the completion of that 20-year service, where he's reading all of this information, he's also performing all of these off-world missions, then his time of service is over. So the first thing they did to him was that they did a thorough debrief, where he basically said everything that he could remember about what happened. Then they essentially put him in this age regression machine, where they regressed him physically in age 20 years, and then they basically sent him back in time 20 years. So he's now sent back from 2007, he's been age regressed physically 20 years back to 1986, 87, and then he's subjected to another debrief, and then his mind is wiped, and he's returned home only minutes after he was originally picked up for his 20-year tour of duty, which sounds incredible. He's not the first whistleblower to say that he went through this. There have been others before him. Michael Ralph, the Mars whistleblower, said he did the same, that something like that happened to him from 1976 to 1996. Another whistleblower just before Corey Good came on the scene, Randy Kramer, or Captain K, says that he also went through a similar 20-year tour of duty and then age regression, 1987 to 2007. So you have three different whistleblowers saying they have gone through a similar process.
Yeah, they call it 20 and back.
Exactly, the 20 and back. But then you have William Tompkins coming forward, and not only does William Tompkins confirm a lot of the information that Corey Good said he experienced and saw, but William Tompkins also said that he had a hand in the development of the age regression technology. That back from back in 1967 to 1971, when he worked at TRW, I think you covered this on one of the shows.
Yeah.
That he worked on developing this technology, and that it was something that was developed to the extent where eventually it was used on these 20 and back personnel. So you have Tompkins now, with all of his testimony and his credentials and the documents he has supporting his background, saying that he did work on this stuff. And one of the other things about Tompkins is that I was able to track down two Navy officers that worked with Tompkins out of the Navy League officers in Medford, Oregon, from 1985 to 1999, and they confirmed some of the things that Tompkins was saying about special projects, secret space programs, and extraterrestrial life. So there you have two witnesses, credible witnesses, actually confirming that Tompkins was playing a role in educating Navy officers and their children in the Sea Cadets about these kinds of off-world programs.
That's fascinating. I live about 20 miles from Medford right now, and had no idea that was going on up here. We've had some remarkable sightings over the years in this area. Mount Shasta is 90 minutes south of where I am. I guess you're going to be appearing there this summer, aren't you, at a conference?
That's right. Yes, I'm going to be there in end of August with Corey Good and a couple of other presenters. And what's interesting about Mount Shasta is that this, according to Bill Tompkins, was one of the special projects that was run out of Medford. That they had a lot of Navy pilots flying around Mount Shasta trying to spot the passageways or the entrances into the underground bases used by the extraterrestrials or the Earth beings or civilizations that were using Mount Shasta as their kind of hidden base. So this was something else that Tompkins said was happening up there at Medford, and as I said, that there were two Navy officers that have said that yes, Tompkins was indeed talking about these things.